the Myers house, also known as the birthplace of evil. If you've seen at least one or maybe two films in the Halloween franchise, you might have caught a glimpse of one of cinema's most unassuming haunted houses. But if you've had the distinct pleasure, like I have, of watching all 12 Halloween films, then you might have noticed that besides the mask being a little off from sequel to sequel, the Myers house itself also never seems to look the same. So in this video, we're going over the complete history and evolution of the Myers house to compare the differences between every single one of them and find out exactly how many people died from going inside. Spoilers ahead, obviously. What is up, Scream Team? Zach Cherry here, and if you're as obsessed with horror movies as I am, you might want to consider hitting that subscribe button and turning on those bell notifications, setting them to all. That way, you can stay up to date with all my latest content. Just for shits and gigs, toss this video a thumbs up and meet me in the comments down below to let me know which version of the Myers house is your favorite. Let's get into it. Located at 45 Lambkin Lane in Haddonfield, Illinois, the Myers house was just your typical suburban home, lived in by an all-American nuclear family. Purchased in the mid-40s by Donald and Edith Myers, the couple would go on to have 3 children together. Judith, born on November 10th, 1947, Michael, born on October 19th, 1957, and Cynthia, born at some point in 1961. Since we are dealing with multiple timelines here, it might get a little messy, so just remember that in the current David Gordon Green trilogy, Cynthia never existed, and the Myers only ever had 2 children. But whichever timeline you choose to follow, one thing remains consistent: the very first murder committed in the house. On the night of October 31st, 1963, while Donald and Edith were out at the movies, 6-year-old Michael, who had been trick-or-treating, had returned home by creeping in through the back of the house, took a large knife out of the kitchen drawer, and walked upstairs to Judith's bedroom, where he murdered the 15-year-old girl by stabbing her multiple times in the chest. Michael was subsequently remanded into police custody, where he was then placed into Smith's Grove Sanitarium. Not wanting to live in the house where their oldest daughter was killed, Donald and Edith moved away with Cynthia shortly thereafter, but due to the attention received by the murder, they were unable to sell the property. In any event, it wouldn't matter, as the couple died in a car crash in 1965, where little orphan Cynthia was adopted by Morgan and Pamela Strode, who renamed her as Lori. At this time, it's unclear whether the property was owned by the state or put into a trust for Lori, which might explain why her adoptive father, who was also a realtor, was made responsible for its sale. But in any case, the Myers house would go on to sit vacant for the next 13 years, where it eventually fell into disrepair, inciting the children of Haddonfield to believe it to be haunted. On October 31st, 1978, 15 years after murdering his sister, Michael, now 21 years old, returns to the now abandoned house after breaking out of Smith's Grove the previous night. In need of nourishment, he kills a neighborhood dog and brings its carcass home, where he feasts on it. Meanwhile, Morgan Strode, who is anticipating prospective buyers to come look at the Myers house that morning, tasks the now 17-year-old Lori to leave the key underneath the mat on her way to school. I love that we never get to see this, but it's gotta be implied that those people showed up at the house, right? Must have taken one step inside, looked to the right, saw the dead dog, and were just like, nope. In any event, Michael would be long gone before they arrived, as after Lori drops off the key, he becomes fixated on her and begins following her around for the rest of the day. Later that evening, Loomis arrives at the house with Sheriff Brackett in hopes of finding Michael. After getting startled by a loose gutter swinging down and breaking the window in Judith's old bedroom, Loomis delivers the famous Devil's Eyes monologue before Brackett takes off, leaving him behind. Over the course of the next few hours, Loomis stands outside, waiting for Michael to return, where he then pranks Lonnie Elam, who is dared by his friends to go inside the house.
Hey, Lonnie, get your ass away from there.
He would eventually leave his post after noticing the stolen station wagon that Michael had used to get to town in, alerting him to the fact that Michael has indeed returned home. Now, this is where things get confusing, because the remainder of the night takes place in 2 different continuities. In the first one, which is depicted in Halloween 2, an angry mob of Haddonfield residents gather outside of the Myers house, where they begin to deface the property by throwing rocks through its windows. It's here where we first learn from Deputy Gary Hunt that the address is 45 145 Lambkin Lane, despite the house's number clearly being labeled as 709. We don't stick around here too long, however, as Laurie is still Michael's sister in this timeline, and he's going wherever she is, which in this case is Haddonfield Memorial Hospital. In the second continuity, which is depicted across 2 flashback scenes in Halloween Kills, Michael returns home after being shot by Dr. Loomis, because he's just so over Laurie Strode at this point. Remember, in this timeline, there never was a Cynthia Myers, which means that Laurie is just some rando girl he wanted to kill. Michael encounters Lonnie Elam in front of the house, whose screams alert deputies Frank Hawkins and Pete McCabe. Lonnie runs away and Michael disappears inside, leading the deputies to go on in after him. We finally get to see the dead dog, which was only ever reacted to in the original, before the two go upstairs after hearing a strange noise. McCabe is attacked by Michael in front of Judith's window and then accidentally shot by Hawkins, who draws his gun. Michael temporarily gets away, only to be ambushed by the entire sheriff's department out on the front lawn, while McCabe dies in the same spot as Judith, becoming the second person to be killed in the Myers house, although ironically not by Michael's hand. Hoping to put an end to the evil for good, Loomis attempts to put a bullet in Michael's head, only to be stopped by Hawkins, who intervenes. Michael is remanded back into police custody and returned to Smith's Grove once again. Like most of the Myers houses used throughout the franchise, the one depicted in Halloween's 1 and 2 was shot on a practical location in South Pasadena. Built in the year 1885, the 2-story home blends Midwestern and Greek Revival architecture with white clapboard siding, gable ornaments, and an addition that extends the first floor on the right-hand back side of the house. The interior yields a traditional American 4-square layout, with the living room, dining room, and den all being accessed from separate entryways in the foyer that feature a transom window above each doorframe. Adjoining doorways also separate each major room from one another, with the kitchen situated in the extended portion at the back of the house, which is also accessed through a doorway into the dining room. Additionally, the foyer has a bathroom at the end of the hallway featuring a transom window that has been filled in. There's also a small closet underneath the stairs. We're never shown the left side of the house in this filming location, so it's unknown what the interior looks like or if it's also split up into separate rooms. However, it should be noted that despite future sequels showing there to be a basement, the original house did not actually have one, as it was built on top of a slab foundation. Similar to the first floor, the upper level contains 4 interior entryways with transom windows above each door and an adjoining doorway separating the bedrooms on either side. Again, we're never shown the rooms on the left side of the house, although it would appear that they belong to the parents and Cynthia, as Judith's room has always been shown to be at the front right-hand side, with Michael's room connected directly behind it. It also doesn't appear to have an upper-level bathroom, which would make sense as a house that old wouldn't be built with one. The only other features of note are a back window that is centered at the top of the landing, which was obscured from view in the movie, and a scuttle hole leading up to the attic, which is also never seen. The 1978 house we see in Halloween Kills is obviously a set, but also a damn near spot-on recreation. Seriously, the only inconsistency I really noticed was the fact that they included an upper hallway closet, which wasn't there before. Of course, there's little nitpicky things here and there, like the windows being wider and the bushes in the front yard being too manicured, but I mean, look at that glass break. They even replicated the shards. That's incredible. I can't tell if this is an inconsistency or not, since we never did see the wall from this angle in the original, but there appears to be a window in Michael's bedroom that looks out onto the backyard. I only question this because if you look at the original house as it sits today, it doesn't appear that there was ever a window there. Also, if you're wondering why the back addition is no longer present, it's because they had to remove it when the house was transported to a new spot in 1987. Chronologically, we don't see the Myers house again until Halloween 5, where being undisturbed for the past 11 years, it's finally entered again when Dr. Terrence Wynn, a former colleague of Loomis's who will henceforth be known as the Man in Black, arrives in town, presumably searching for Michael. Dr. Loomis also arrives at the house when he believes that Michael not only survived the events of Halloween 4, but is also sending his niece Jamie Lloyd telepathic DMs. For some reason, the only place Loomis thinks to look for him is inside a tiny laundry chute, where he instead finds a dead possum and decides to not bother looking in any of the other rooms, which is too bad, since if only he had looked upstairs, he would have seen that Michael had already murdered and stashed Rachel's corpse and set up a tiny coffin in preparation to kill Jamie. Loomis devises a plan to lure Michael back to the house by using Jamie as bait, but the sheriff department won't allow him to do it alone, so he tricks most of them into leaving by having Jamie feign one of her psychic visions, which turns out to be real. Honestly, this part never made any sense to me. Michael soon arrives where he hangs Deputy Charlie Block out of what I assume to be Judith's old bedroom window, becoming the third death to occur on the property. Following a lengthy chase scene involving a claustrophobic set piece in the laundry chute, Jamie comes to the attic where she finds the corpses of Rachel, Mike, and Max the dog, as well as like 100 lit candles, which again, how did nobody notice this? They just had the entire police force there. Michael catches up to Jamie where he for some reason takes off his mask and releases a single teardrop, which triggers a temper tantrum, sending the young girl into the arms of a crazed Dr. Loomis. It's actually kind of hard to tell who's more of a psychopath here, because Loomis is behaving downright diabolical. In any event, he drops a chain net on top of Michael before shooting him up with tranquilizers and beating him senselessly with a 2x4 of wood. The excitement causes Loomis to suffer a major heart attack where he then collapses on top of Michael, who is then taken away from the house in police custody once again. Okay, so we don't need to pussyfoot around this subject because this is not the Myers house. For all intents and purposes it is, but how can anyone watch this movie for the first time and not be completely gobsmacked by that reveal? It's not even really fair to point out the differences here as they're so blatantly obvious, but let's at least run through the basics. The Myers house is now an enormous gothic-looking Victorian mansion. It's got 3 stories and a basement with a multi-level laundry chute and an attic which is accessed by a separate stairwell rather than a scuttle hole. There's some giant-ass turret thing going on over here as well, and it's now situated on a corner lot that's surrounded by a metal gate with a yard that's overgrown with some very dead looking vegetation. The address is also now shown to be 1007. Reportedly, when they were scouting locations for the Myers house in Salt Lake City, the filmmakers had every intent to find a similar looking house. But director Dominique Othenin-Girard fell in love with the mansion and thought it would be an excellent location for the film's climax as it facilitated a much more elaborate chase sequence. And I know this was probably one of the most controversial decisions of the franchise, but personally, I'm alright with it. You heard it right here, folks. I like the Myers mansion. Sue me. We next see the house in Halloween: The Curse of Michael Myers, where 6 years have passed since the events of Halloween 5. With Strode Realty being unable to sell the property, John Strode, who has now taken over the business from his brother Morgan, moves into the house with his wife Deborah and their college-aged son Tim, making them the first people to live there since Judith's murder in 1963. Shortly thereafter, their estranged daughter Kara also moves in after falling on hard times, bringing along her young son Danny, much to the chagrin of her abusive alcoholic father. While Danny soon begins to have nightmares of the Man in Black who encourages him to kill his family, Loomis pays a visit to the house where he warns Deborah that they're all in danger as long as they stay there. It's too late, however, as Michael has already returned home, where he kills Deborah, John, Tim, and Tim's girlfriend Beth, bringing the Myers house death toll up to 7. Kara and Danny both survive as they had been staying across the street in Tommy Doyle's apartment at the time. However, Danny is lured back into the Myers house in a trance-like state, causing Kara to chase after him. She arms herself with a fire poker and, after discovering the bodies of her family, knocks Michael down the stairs before rescuing her son and leaving the house behind for good. As seen in Halloween 6, the Myers house is another brand new practical location that attempts to more closely imitate the appearance of the original. Now more of an arts and crafts style home, the exterior siding is beige in color and the trim and front door are a dark green. The house also has a lattice underdeck as well as a second floor balcony that sits on top of the porch. Also, for the first and only time in the franchise, the address is correctly shown to be 45 Lambkin Lane. The interior of the house is similar-ish enough, at least from what we see, but while in the original we were shown much of the right side of the house, here we're instead mostly shown the left side, which features the dining room as the back entry point with the kitchen adjoined by its side and the living room situated in the front. Carried over from Halloween 5, we do have the basement again. The staircase staircase is in the correct spot in the foyer, but appears to curve into a landing halfway up, where the orientation of the hallway and rooms on the upper level take a bit of a departure from the original. The house does include a scuttle hole to the attic, which would go on to become a well-worn cliche for falling corpses. However, unlike the original house, this one does include an upstairs bathroom. Based on an early exterior shot, you could surmise that Kara sleeps in Judith's old bedroom while Danny now has Michael's. However, it doesn't quite line up later on when they're running away from the shape, as it would seem to indicate that Danny is now in Judith's room, as the door to the hallway is on the left side. In actuality, the house was once the home of a madam who ran the place as a brothel in the 1960s. This explains why the rooms upstairs do seem a little closed in, as the house itself is separated into several smaller apartments. Ignoring the timeline of Halloween's 5 and 6, but using the scene in Halloween 2 with the angry mob as a jumping off point, the Myers house is subsequently boarded up and left to decay over the course of the next 2 decades. Michael, whose body was never recovered from the fire at Haddonfield Memorial, takes refuge in the sewers below the house, where he lives undetected for 24 years. After killing his sister Laurie Strode, he's finally able to relax and I guess eat rats and stuff, until an obnoxious entrepreneur organizes a live stream internet reality show called Dangertainment, where he sends a group of 6 college students into the house, which has been rigged with cameras and staged with a bunch of fake props. Michael doesn't take too kindly to the intrusion, however, so he murders 7 more people, including 2 Dangertainment employees, Charlie and Nora, as well as 5 of the 6 participants, Bill, Donna, Jen, Jim, and Rudy, bringing the Myers house death toll up to 14. In the end, Michael gets electrocuted in his junk and is burned alive for a second time when the backyard garage catches fire. So for the first time in the franchise, a replica of the Myers house had been built on a soundstage, and while this set was certainly praised at the time for recapturing the original look of the house, there are a ton of architectural inaccuracies to be found, not to mention some creative liberties that don't do this model any favors. And while the locations used in 5 and 6 couldn't really help the fact that they weren't identical to the original, this one had every opportunity to match the design, so I'm personally going to be a lot more critical here when making comparisons. Starting with the outside, the house is now completely boarded up, which, you know, makes sense. It's been abandoned for 39 years at this point. That would explain the unkept yard and the moss growing on the roof. They even captured the deterioration of the clapboard siding and feature the same gabled ornaments. But then, why is there a picket fence lining the front yard? That wasn't there in 63 or 78, so it's a bit of an unnecessary and historically inaccurate addition. Speaking of which, the property now has a detached garage at the far back right-hand side. Obviously, this was added for script purposes, but as we know from the original, it clearly was not there before. The number and style of windows on the side of the house also don't match, and the back side of the roof should not be salt boxed like that, as there should be an exterior wall for the upper level here. They did remember to include this lower level addition, so that's something, although I don't know what any of this is. That should definitely not be there. Nor should this dormer window or chimney, which were never part of the original house. They did remember to include a transom window above the front entrance, but once we move into the foyer, you can see that the entryways to the den and living room no longer have one. Same with this door, which was formerly the bathroom, but now appears to be a pantry that connects the foyer to the kitchen and basement. There's also no longer a separate entryway into the dining room, nor is there a closet under the stairs, which is probably due to the fact that the basement stairs run directly underneath. The den is still pretty much the same basic layout, with a doorway connecting it to the dining room, which then has a doorway connecting it to the kitchen. However, the kitchen has now been reoriented from the back side of the dining room to the left side instead. It's also much larger than it was originally and has a doorway into the living room, which then circles back around to the foyer. The second floor of the house features a mezzanine style landing, creating a large gap between the stairs and the railing, which makes the hallway much wider than it should be. To better understand what I mean, just picture Michael killing Cameron Elam on this staircase. His neck would literally have to extend out by 4 feet from the upper level railing in order for Michael to grab his head while standing on the stairs. Just like the main level, none of the doors have transom windows above them, and the bedrooms are no longer connected by adjoining doorways. There's also a 5th door in place of where the window should should be along the back wall of the hallway, which appears to now be where the bathroom is and probably explains all that extra junk on the roof from earlier. We're also shown the inside of the attic. However, the scuttle hole has been moved from the center of the upstairs hallway to be closer to the front end of the house. Now, probably the biggest anomaly about this design is the fact that the basement houses a sub-basement below it, which is accessed through a giant sewer grate. This room is somehow connected to a series of Parisian-style tunnels. However, it's unclear if these subterranean passageways run all throughout the town of Haddonfield or are just unique to the Myers house, as we also see that there's an access point located in the garage. In any event, this would be where Michael eats, sleeps, and uses the bathroom, which is way more information than I ever needed to know about him. Erasing the previous continuity, we're now back to the timeline in which Michael returned home after trying to kill Laurie in 78. Remember, this is the one where Laurie is no longer his younger sister. The Myers house is now owned by John Soto and his partner John Massey, who also run their own realty business together. Presumably, the couple had purchased and renovated the house some time ago as they were drawn to its history and the novelty of living in a serial killer's childhood home. On the night of October 31st, 2018, Michael returns to the house after escaping custody during a Smiths Grove inmate transfer, where he murders both of them, bringing the house's death toll up to 16. Meanwhile, a vigilante mob has formed in Haddonfield in order to bring Michael to justice. Believing that the killer is heading back to his childhood home, Lonnie Elam heads to the house with his son Cameron and Laurie's granddaughter Allison, but becomes the house's 17th casualty almost immediately upon entering. Michael also kills Cameron, who becomes the 18th, but Allison is saved at the last minute by her mother Karen, who attacks Michael and lures him out of the house by stealing his mask. She returns later on after believing the rest of the mob to have killed Michael and sees a vision of his 6-year-old self standing in front of Judith's old bedroom window. This incites her to go upstairs and stand in the same spot, where Michael sneaks up behind her and stabs her multiple times in the chest, bringing the Myers house death toll up to 19. As this was the same set used for the flashback sequence to 1978, we already know that the house is architecturally identical to that one. The only thing that was different, as I had pointed out, was the closet at the front end of the upstairs hallway, which, based on Michael hiding in there before attacking Cameron, we can assume that it was added specifically for that scripted purpose. The house, as seen in 2018, has been completely cleaned out and gutted. The clapboard siding is now painted a cornflower blue and has dark red trim around the windows and along the edges of the roof, most likely to capture the look of the house as it appears in real life today. The interior is now open concept, with the walls between the kitchen, dining room, and den all being removed and featuring a decorative glass window that separates this area from the foyer. The room at the end of the foyer, which based on the original design was the bathroom, appears to now be some sort of connecting back hallway which leads to the left side of the house, meaning that the home is not actually equipped with a toilet or a bath. This is the first time we get to see the left side in its original architectural form, where a dividing wall separating the front and back was also likely removed, with the Johns currently using this space as their dining area. Upstairs, the dividing walls between the bedrooms on either side have also been removed, leaving just 2 larger rooms with separate entryways at the front and back. The room on the left has been fashioned into a study, while the room on the right, which used to be both Michael and Judith's bedrooms, has now become just one bedroom. And finally, the house once again has a scuttle hole, which, based off of the original design, is the first time we ever get to see it in its proper spot. I want to thank my Patreon supporter Jimmy Yanes. If you want to see even more Halloween related content, you can check out either one of these playlists right here. Until next time, I've been Zach Cherry, and I'll be right back.